Hello, and welcome to the Energy and Consciousness Summit. I'm Sheila Doerfler, your host, and today we have Robert Jackman. Robert is a psychotherapist and author of Healing Your Lost Inner Child. So welcome, Robert. Thank you for being here today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be with you today and to participate in your summit.
Great, great. So Robert, will you tell the people who are listening a little bit more about yourself and just a little bit of background and your work?
Sure. So I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and I've been working with folks for over 20 years. Doing all sorts of psychodynamic processes with folks who see me. But at the same time, what I've been doing since beginning in my early 20s, which now is almost 40 years ago, I began my own inner child healing journey. And that is really what brings me to the present moment, in that all of this work that I've done within myself, I'm now able to help others who are coming to see me with. So everything that I've gone through, what I've walked, I'm able to help someone else walk that path as well.
Great, great. So can you explain, because, I do inner child work, that's why I've included you in the summit. And it's been transformational in my own life. But can you explain to people how doing inner child work changes our energy, our consciousness, and just how it affects our lives and our system?
I think that's a great question and a great way to look at it, because doing inner child work really allows us to go back to the origin, sort of our origin story, where we're looking at our childhood families and we're saying, okay, what did I pick up from this childhood family dynamic? What did I learn? How did that imprint me? What were the attachment styles? What were the attachment traumas that I experienced from that childhood family? And how did that really shape my idea of myself? So it's the idea of being able to say the authentic self, the part of us that didn't adapt and change for someone else's comfort, that is still whole and complete, is there within us. And so it's about looking at all of these layers. I call them wet blankets that were put on top of us, really sort of smothering our light. And we haven't been able to really express ourselves fully because we were making everyone else comfortable. And so we learn these very specific, I call them skills that we learn, codependent skills, or I also reference them as wounded tools that we learned to navigate these very difficult and challenging family dynamics. And so that when we're able to really kind of get into that and sort of to peel back the layers, we're able to start to really see that inner child wounding, when it started. I can get more into that as well, as far as the process that I take folks through. But getting back into how and when that started, and when that false narrative began to develop within us. Okay. So when we're able to do that, we're able to really uncover a lot.
Great. And so with the false narrative and some of the other things you were just mentioning, can you speak a little bit more about, how, based on our family dynamic that we grow up in, how is that getting internalized into our system and our beliefs and our perceptions? Can you speak a little bit to that?
That's a great question. I'll reference my own story with that, which I talk about in my book. But I grew up in a very loving family. I knew at a deep level that my parents loved me. So I feel very fortunate that I knew that they loved me. I knew that they cherished me, but they, like so many folks, young couples, they were going through their struggles. Their wounding was coming out essentially. Their inner child was, were raging essentially, and they would get into arguments and fights, and that was really scary for me. So I was this empathic kid, so I was picking up all of this energy, and I didn't know what to do with all of it. And so they would be yelling, arguing, and then at times they'd be loving and fun. And I'm like, this is really confusing for me. But my idea in my little boy head at the time was, okay, so I don't like it when they yell or argue. So I'll become perfect. I'll do everything that they say that they want me to do. And then that will stop the arguing. That will stop this sort of chaos. So that was my attempt to control this environment. So that really began to shape my sense of self and my sort of role in the family, because I was firstborn. So I took on the responsibility for this outcome. But of course, it didn't affect them. They still went on and had adult issues, and they were still arguing or whatever. And then I started to think that I was a failure, because even though I tried to be perfect and do everything right, they were still arguing. So I was like, I'm doing something wrong. So that's just a small example of the core wounding that I internalized, and how that began to shape this false narrative of myself that I wasn't good enough, which is at the core of codependency. That's at the core of our inner child wounding.
Right, right. Yeah, and that makes me think of Marissa Peer's work. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She's the founder of rapid transformation therapy, so hypnotherapy, and she talks about the 4 core beliefs that like all of humanity has in common. And so it's sort of, as children, because of the way we're processing the world, when there are things like that, your parents arguing, the child doesn't ever say, oh, there's something wrong with them and their marriage. Instead, like as children, the way that we take that on is we don't make the adults wrong ever. We make ourselves wrong.
Right.
And so that even when we grow up in loving homes, the way that children are taking in their world creates these core woundings, these core false beliefs that, I'm not enough, and what I want is not available to me. And then there are 2 others I can't remember at the moment, but I find that fascinating that it's even in a loving home that children are still going to perceive the world in this way that later is going to impact their life, right?
That's so true. And I think, to your point, that's where we develop these broken boundaries. Because here I thought I was doing everything that I should be doing, but it wasn't affecting my mom and dad. So then I thought, okay, I'm doing something wrong. So then I just lost all this sense of boundary that, where I ended and they began. I just sort of merged with them and got all enmeshed with their stuff. And so, of course, poor boundaries, broken boundaries are really what just keeps on enabling all of this core wounding to persist.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to me that you can have some awareness as well that, you have issues to work on. But then when you start to notice that the things that, the limiting beliefs that you picked up, they're impacting your relationships, but then they also show up in your career, your business, and they may or may not be the same beliefs,
Right.
so it's like we have to take an inventory at the results that we're getting in the different quadrants of our life, and then sort of go in and heal those inner children.
hmm Well, you're right, because all of that inner child wounding, we just, we pack that up at 18 or 20 when we move out of our parents' house, and we just bring that into our adult life. So here I packed up all of my wounded tools that were really, quote unquote, effective at me navigating my family of origin. And I brought it into my young adult life. And I was just using those same codependent tools. So I would just, use these over and over, thinking, okay, if I do this, I know this process, I know these tools, I know how to use them. I'm just going to use them in my adult life. But of course, it was screwing things up even more.
Right.
But I didn't realize what was happening, and I think that's what so many people that I encountered and that I was experiencing as a young adult was I didn't understand why my relationships were so screwed up. I didn't realize why I kept on attracting these narcissistic people into my life. And then I would play out this drama with them. I would, do everything to make their lives better. I heard it's not a quote from me, but I heard this quote that really explained where I was at that point in my life, where I was setting myself on fire so others were warm. And so I was right. So I was really, just tearing myself down
Mhm.
just so others would feel good and their life wouldn't be any problems or whatever. But I was making myself less than and them greater than.
Right, right. Well, and it's also how we unwittingly seek what's familiar. And so that that role, as uncomfortable as it made your life, you didn't understand where you hadn't yet figured out where it was coming from. And it's like those coping mechanisms. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I think at 18, we don't even realize that we are just a bundle of coping mechanisms, most of us.
We're trying our best with what we know and what we have. But that toolkit, again, going back to that analogy, that toolkit was designed specifically for our family of origin. So for these very unique characters in our family of origin. And so we have all these tools that are designed just for that environment. Then we bring them into our adult environment and we're like, well, let me go to my toolkit and see how to deal with you. Okay, this is what I have. And so that's where people keep on reusing these wounded tools over and over, trying to get a different result. And it's just not going to happen.
Right, right. And the inner child work that I had done most recently, they talk about it in terms of parts, so that you have the protector part, you have the manager part. There are all these different parts that play a role, and ultimately you want to make peace. You want to have a conversation with even the parts that feel yucky, right? Like, because they're all part of what we've internalized. So we've internalized the inner critic from either a parent or other adults, and then that part is one of our voices. It's one of our parts that tries to run the show in order to protect us, or control a situation to make us feel safe, right?
I
It's
think you're referencing internal family systems, or
yeah, yeah,
that references parts. And so the inner child work that I do dovetails really nicely with that, because they're referencing parts, but I'm referencing the inner child
right.
and all the sort of characteristics of the inner child. I want to make one thing really clear, and that is, you know, our when we were young kids, we were doing our best with everything we had available to us. So we were doing our best developing these tools to help us navigate this sort of dysfunctional environment. Um, so it's about honoring our inner child. It's about celebrating the inner child, celebrating how hard that part of us worked to protect us and to help us grow even amidst, challenging times. So the work I do is recognizing the wisdom of the inner child, the wisdom of those parts, because that part is the inner child has been with us our whole life, helping us, looking out for us. And it's that part, the inner child, that when triggered, steps in front of the adult self and starts to go into that protection mode with the tools that I've referenced before. So that's the part that's like, okay, this trigger just happened. Someone's yelling, someone's arguing. Let me do this. Oh, this is the tool I use. I get really small when someone else yells.
Mhm.
So I'm going to shrink down and avoid conflict because that's the tool I have in my toolkit. And so that's what helped, let's say, in my family of origin, but that doesn't help me be a fully functioning adult. That doesn't help me in my relationships. But that inner child, that part just knows to grab that conflict avoidance tool. It doesn't have any reference point as far as like helping to know that we can set boundaries and we can look out for ourselves in other ways. And that's what I teach in my work, is that boundary setting really is the way out of this maze. It's the way to help us to protect ourselves, to use our words, to use our voice, to let our authentic self come through, and give the inner child that opportunity to say, okay, I don't have to work so hard to protect all of us anymore. That the adult self, that I have words, I can set boundaries, I can protect myself. I don't have to use these wounded tools anymore to do that.
Right. Right.
Big shift.
So when you are working with clients or when they're using your workbook, because your book has a workbook companion, right? Um, when they're doing the work, are they going back to the different ages? Are they working with the age when they find a coping mechanism they're using that they want to
Mhm.
shift? um, do they go back to the first memory of being that way, or how are you working with the different ages of our inner children, like as a whole?
Right. That's a great question. And so what I have folks do is first identify the wounded tools that they're using, like what you're talking about. But then I have them do a timeline from birth to 20. And so I have them just write out, when I was 5, I had a fun birthday party. When I had 6, my parents divorced, or whatever it is. So birth to age 20, as much as they can remember. And then what I have them do is I have them rate the intensity of those different things that they put on their timeline, so that helps then to say, boy, this was a 10. This was really intense when my parents divorced when I was 6 years old. So that really stands out. It's an emotional standout. And then I have them, look at all their other ages. And then I have them go back and say, okay, which ones really stand out for you? Which ones sort of encapsulate that time for you? And that's what I call the age of wounding. So the age of wounding then is what we focus on. And let's say for me, it was 10 years old when I had sort of had enough of my mom and dad's arguing, and it was just so intense for me that was a big pivot point for me. So age 10 is a big age of wounding for me. And that's what we use to then reference all of the inner child work, the symbolic letters that I have them write from the inner child to the adult self and the adult self to the inner child self. Because the goal, if you think about it, the goal is integration.
Mhm.
The goal is to bring the inner child out of this sort of wounded, this frozen, lost place into integrated with the adult self. So that really is the end goal of this work.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that aspect of it. That the whole point of doing it is to tap into the whole. That it's about integration. bringing all those parts home. Yeah.
bringing them all home, integrate them. Because if you think about it, I still have a 10-year-old little boy inside of me who's like can get, understands and remembers all of that stuff. But he no longer gets triggered if someone that I'm with is arguing or whatever the trigger is. So he's no longer getting triggered. He recognizes it. I recognize what's happening, but I have all of this healed self within me now. And I have all these new functional tools that I call them. I have these functional tools that help me navigate these situations as an adult. So my 10-year-old little boy is like, yeah, okay, he's going to take care of it, meaning my adult self. That my inner child doesn't need to run in front of me and say, oh my God, we have to do this or that. It's like, no, I've got it. I can take care of this.
Right. Like that you're safe.
You're safe. That's the message. You're safe.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how does, I'm really curious because this popped in my head a couple moments ago. When we're in a family, like in my family, I'm the third out of four. And I just recently realized a lifelong pattern that I have that was showing up in my business and me stepping into leadership. And it's like having been the third child to older siblings, how does the pecking order in a family or the roles we got stuck in, which may not even be related to pecking order, how do those impact the system? Like how do those show up in just the inner child work? How can we bring some light to that?
I love that question. I think it's so great because you're talking about birth order, but you're also talking about family roles that we take on. So I have a great story. If you'll indulge me, let me tell
Yes.
you this. So and it's in the book, but so I was the oldest. Then my sister was born 7 years after I was. So I'm the oldest. She's the youngest. And as the oldest, I was like, on the front lines of, I was the experiment from my mom and dad. They never had kids before. So I was like the guinea pig. So they used everything on me. And then I developed all these wounded tools to sort of deal with their stuff. Right. And then, so my sister was born. And what I realized is that how much I was protecting her. I felt very protective of her. And at the age of 10, that age of wounding that I described earlier, there was a pivotal moment in our family where I literally was protecting her physically. And that's part of what contributed to the intensity of that time. But so I was trying to shield her from everything that I was experiencing with my mom and dad. And so then when I left home, I went to Loyola in Chicago. So I left Kentucky, went to Chicago because part of me was like, I need to get out of here. It's like, I am done, right? Like I have done so much work. I mean, literally, I felt exhausted. I felt like I'm ready to retire from being the kid in this, being the oldest in this family. I want to go. But what happened was, so I left, and of course I didn't think of this at all, but basically I left my sister then on the front lines. And she didn't have all of these fancy tools that I had developed to sort of deal with this family dynamic, because I was the peacemaker, the caretaker, the fixer, the rescuer. I was the hero. I was, the conflict avoider. I was like, I had this like intense package of tools that I knew how to navigate. I had this matrix of like, my dad came home, angry and then started drinking. Okay, I do these three things, so I knew all of these specific tools. My sister didn't, she saw all of that. But she didn't have to develop them because I was there. So I leave, go to school, and then my sister talks about how it was so hard for her because here she is now with them, with my mom and dad, and she doesn't know what to do. And she's not being sort of protected in the same way. And so to your point, it's like that's how the family roles shifted, because then she had to quickly develop her own set of wounded tools to deal with this dysfunctional environment, which
Yeah.
of course I never thought of as a teenage boy. I mean, why would I? I just wanted to get out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had been a buffer for so many years.
Right.
So, yeah. And then, so I'm curious, did she feel abandoned by you? Like, was, was it just a matter of her having to figure out how to navigate this, or was there also layers of that impacted your relationship with her because of how she interpreted your leaving?
What she's told me is that she missed me, and she was sort of really affected by the intensity of the situation. That it's almost like she didn't have time to process all of the feelings that maybe someone else could have at the time, because for her it was about emotional survival.
Yeah.
It wasn't about being able to access sort of these layers. I think later on she was able to verbalize that, and as I was writing the book, I asked if I could include this story in the book, because it's such a powerful way to look at the family system, and how each member of the family, like you're the third child born in the family, so you had a very specific role in your family system, just like my sister had her very specific role.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah, just all the gender messages you get. I mean, it's so complex, really. I mean,
Um,
it's,
or,
sorry, go ahead.
right. There's so much packed into our young life. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible if you think about it. And my work is never about blaming parents or caregivers, because I know that they were doing the best with the tools they had, just like I was doing the best with the tools that I had. So it wasn't like they were setting out to create this difficult environment for me. They wanted the best for me. They wanted the best for themselves, but they just didn't have all the tools available for them to make that happen.
Right. Well, and we do inherit the wounds. So they inherited their wounding from their parents. And, even though we can wish they could have woken up sooner and been more conscious, like I think about the even just the social economic reality of the time and the era that my parents were growing up, and they had, you know the generation before had been through a couple wars. uh, I mean, we really don't have a sense. Like, we're living in our own little reality. We don't necessarily have a true sense of what our parents inherited, and it wasn't talked about, at least their generation, my parents' generation. They didn't talk about feelings, right?
No, they drank and smoked away their feelings.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, they didn't go there. That was scary stuff. So but they carried all of this trauma wounding within them,
Right.
that coming out in sort of sideways and passive aggressive ways, but none of it was processed in a healthy way.
So in your work, in your inner child work that you do, how are you bringing that deeper understanding to the work? Like, let's say that you have a client that is just so angry, about what had happened to them, and then that is coloring their whole world. How do you begin to unravel that with a client in your work?
That's a great question. And I think that the most important thing that I do in those situations is respecting the emotion, because our emotions are just messengers. So the emotion that that client is having of that big anger, uh, she or he is trying to tell me the state of fear that they're in, because anger is fear under great pressure. So is the push or the punch of that anger that's coming out, they're telling me that they're in a great state of fear and that they're screaming at the top of their lungs, I'm scared. And so that really is the first thing we work on is tell me more about this. I really want to understand. And I would probably even say the same thing that I just said to you, as far as, explaining what anger is and normalizing it and celebrating it and saying that that anger is there to protect you. So what do you need protection from? So it's normalizing it and saying it's okay to be angry. And I have part of my story is when I went into my therapy in my 20s. Now remember, I was trying to be this perfect little boy for my mom and dad. And so I had shut down big parts of my emotional range because I was trying to be available and adapting to them versus myself. So I didn't know how to express my anger. I knew my dad would express his anger in a big way. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
So I shut down my anger. So I get into my therapy in my 20s. And after the first session or so, my therapist says, so let's talk about your anger. And I was like, I'm not angry. What are you talking about? I got very nervous and self-aware. And of course, he saw it immediately. He saw how much I was pushing that down in order to project this image that I'm okay, don't come any closer, stay back, all of that stuff. So it's the first step is really just I know the first step is just really honoring the emotion. And if you're having a feeling, just say, okay, why am I having this feeling? Because it's a reaction to something.
Right.
And just you can go a little bit deeper within yourself and say, what is this coming from? Because it's a reaction to something. And we're just it's a messenger. So it's like, what is this emotion trying to tell me?
Right. Right. So a couple of things about the anger. My understanding, just from my own healing journey, but then also being a mom, what I noticed is children get shamed,
Yes.
so even as early as being an infant with needs, the crying, we get shushed and shamed, and that normal range of emotions that a child's feeling, even in the most loving homes, because people are worried, about, the impressions their crying baby is, making,
Yeah.
and the reflection, and that it reflects bad on them as parents. And so, even in homes where there isn't a lot of that fear and violence, it's the it's kind of our culture that we are shamed for, especially anger. And so it's no wonder that we grow up wanting to suppress it as a coping mechanism, because it's not welcome. It's not welcome when we're young, and it's certainly not welcome as a mode of being in the adult world.
That's
Um,
true. And I think to your point, I think that we're shamed a lot for feelings other people think we shouldn't be having, right?
yes,
And
yes.
so a little example of that is when a kid comes to a parent and says, "Mom or Dad, I have a tummy ache."
Mhm.
and the parent says, "Oh, you're fine. Just go out and play. You're fine." All right, so right then, a lot of stuff is happening in that exchange, right? The child begins to sort of doubt themselves, like, well, I know my body and my tummy hurts, but mom or dad just told me that it doesn't. So I'm learning not to trust myself and to doubt myself and to give other people power.
Yeah.
So in that short exchange, that's how quickly this false narrative can develop within a child. And that's a small example, but then multiply that by all these different sort of experiences that the child might have of going to a parent or the parent saying, "Are you really going to wear that? Why are you doing this?" Right? And so that's the child who grows up doubting themselves and not trusting themselves and probably having anxiety. But
Mhm.
that's the origin story of where this stuff comes from. So
Right.
a lot of people will say, "Oh, I didn't have anything traumatic happen to me in my childhood," and I believe them. But then I'm like, "Well, why have you been married 3 times? Like this, something's not adding, right? Something's not adding up for me
Right.
when tell me I had a perfectly fine childhood, but there's all this dysfunction in their adult life because they develop some wounded tools in childhood that they brought into their adult life and they're just playing out over and over."
Right. Right. So, wow. So, Robert, this is fascinating stuff. I'm so grateful that you put your work out in the world. And can you let people know where they can find you, where they can find your book, and just anything else about getting in touch with you?
Sure. Thank you so much. So folks can find my book on Amazon.com, Healing Your Lost Inner Child. So here's a picture of the book, and there's a workbook as well, as you mentioned before. Or they can go on my website, which is theartofpracticalwisdom.com. And there's a YouTube channel with the same name, The Art of Practical Wisdom.
Great, fabulous. And you mentioned the other day that you have another book coming out. Can you just give us a little preview what that one is?
I do have another book coming out. This book is going to be on wounded relationships. So I referenced that in the first book, but this really expands upon the work that someone's done in the first book into understanding how hurt people attract or find other hurt people, why we keep dating or marrying the same type of person, why we keep on having the same sort of relationship dramas. But it's not just identifying those. It's about coming up with communication tools to help them navigate those situations that they find themselves in. And then I've come up with just different examples to help people understand, again, that this is normal stuff, that we're all just bringing our wounding into our adult life until we heal it, but it keeps on playing out over and over until that's healed. So
Yeah.
that hopefully that book will probably be out midsummer. That's the hope.
Oh, great. Awesome. So
Yeah.
just a few months, actually.
Well, I know I should say a caution, but that's our intention is midsummer.
Good.
This book really wants to come out just like the first book. The first book came out in 9 months, and this book is about the same way. There's such an energy that builds around these books, and I believe that people really are looking for some healing messages.
Mhm.
My book is selling all over the world, and it just is amazing to me. And every day I say an intention that everyone who has my book in their hands, may they receive the healing message that they're looking for from the book. And so that's the goodness, I'm trying to put out there with the books.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's very timely information. So, and I think when like you embody your own work, that you're able to just be this conduit for wisdom to come through because you've integrated enough that it gives you the clarity and ability for this wisdom to just move through you. So thank
Thank
you
you. Yeah,
so much.
be in the flow, right?
Yes.
So it's like you're in the flow because you've done your work. So that it just comes through us, and we've walked the walk. So now we can talk it, right? Because we've ourselves gone through this. But I have so enjoyed being with you today, Sheila. This is just such an honor and a privilege.
Same, same. I'm just so grateful that you made the time for our interview and to just share so, just so generously with me and with everyone else, and in the form of your books that, the universe tapped you on the shoulder and said, "You're going to be writing books," and you said, "Okay, use me."
I had put that off for years. And, I realized after I got into writing the first book, I realized that I had put it off for so many years because of the doubt, because I didn't feel that my message was any different than, because other people have written about inner child work. So what do I have to say? So it was some of this old wounding that was showing up, even though I've done like decades worth of work. It was some of this old wounding that was showing up of, well, what do I have to say? But doing work around that and helping myself process that, and now seeing all these over 5,000 people around the world are reading my book, so it's just so far, so that's amazing.
That's fabulous. It's
Yeah,
it's it's exciting.
it is. What I say is that I feel very humbled and I feel very proud. So it's just a beautiful thing.
Great. I love it. And I love your stories. They're fabulous. So,
Thank
well, thank you so much again for being here today. And if you want to learn more about Robert, check out his links below the video. And I hope you all have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. And there are more great talks to come. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next interview. Thanks so much, Robert.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you again.